Let's cut the bullshit.
Just drop the job.
Adam and Simon's Bullshit Busters.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Adam and Simon Bullshit Busters. I'm Simon Batchelor,
I am Adam Bastock.
and this week we are going to be talking all about the supply chain for your business. So this week we're going to unpack a little bit around what the supply chain is and how it affects both the emissions in your business as well as the other businesses that you do business with. So lots of different businesses there. So to get started, Adam, do you want to start off by giving us a little bit of an intro into the different ways we're going to look at the supply chain as it relates to the emissions of your business?
Yeah, so if everyone's got their bingo cards ready, we're going to hit one of those keywords off immediately, which is talking about your Scope 3 emissions, which is essentially the part of this that falls into, which is very technical and very complicated. When I won't go too much more into that, but I think the reason why when we're doing a lot of workshops and training with smaller organizations and explaining the carbon footprint and the impact of Scope 3, there is this overwhelm and slight fear that comes through when you start diving into it, because you start to realize that actually everything you're selling and everything that you are buying in from others to sell or to process the services that you're producing, all of that is part of your carbon footprint. Now, that is not to say that you are directly responsible for those carbon footprints, but it does mean that you have to be aware of the impact that you are having as an organization on that. And I think we're starting to see this is where the competitive advantage of having a strong sustainability story or having a carbon reduction plan is coming into play. Because if you can demonstrate that actually you're doing more than your competitors are on sustainability, you're going to be more preferential to other companies who are feeling that same overwhelm around the fact that they're realizing that their supply chain is their emissions as well. And therefore, if you are a low carbon provider that they can work with, you're more likely to win out. So that's the sort of broader picture here, which we can go into a bit more detail on, but it is that element of the things that you are purchasing in and where they're coming from, who you're buying them from, what their policies are, what their standards are, all is going to impact on how your business operates. And therefore, that's your superpower as a smaller organization, is that's the influence that you can start having within the space. And, are you buying virgin grade material that's coming from Amazonian deforestation plantations, or are you buying it from kind of a local FSC accredited Scottish family run business? These are the things that we are used to doing and the decisions we are used to making as small business owners, in where we're spending our money is a vote in that sense for a better world. And it's just understanding and influencing that.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, because the different ways you can look at your supply chain are kind of often overlooked, I think, by a lot of businesses, in the sense that they just assume that, well, actually, I'm a small business, so I'm only buying a small amount of this. Surely that can't add up. But actually, I think it does start to send a message up and down the supply chain. So obviously, as a small business, you buy in lots of different goods and services into your business, but also you may be supplying what you make or produce or deliver into a bigger business. So one of the aspects that I think is often overlooked by businesses is that actually often you're part of a supply chain into another supply chain, if you see what I mean. So you may end up with your goods or services ending up in some very big PLC company. It's a massive business compared to the size of yours. So your buying and purchasing decisions directly influence their supply chain emissions, which I think is something that's really powerful and can stack up across a whole business.
A great example of this is Tesco's, where I think they've got on their sustainability page, and you might have to dig a little bit for it or try and dig the link out, but they've got a breakdown of their emissions. And they go into the technical details, but I wouldn't worry too much about that. There's this real nice sort of pie chart they've got of their emissions. And you think of someone the size of Tesco's, it's mostly going to be in delivery vans and customers driving to the store and all the energy that the fridges are using. But in reality, about 50% of their emissions are from the products that they are selling, and about 40% of their emissions are from the products that customers are buying and then throwing away. So that is everything from food waste to how the packaging is being disposed of, to whether they're buying loads of meat products, which might have a higher footprint than non-meat products, or whatever it might be. There is this broader understanding that Tesco's have gone on, or journey that Tesco's have gone on, in understanding just the scale of their operations, meaning that everything they're buying and selling does have that footprint. And so I think there's two ways to look at that. One, Tesco's are now, in order to decarbonise and meet their own net zero targets, they're going to need to start tackling that supply chain to go, well, 90% of our emissions are coming from the products we're selling. Therefore, how do we work with the people we're buying it from to make sure that they are decarbonising? That might mean that they are supporting them in decarbonisation measures. It might mean they're not. I don't really know too much detail there, but I think what you said there, Simon, about feeding into other businesses is really key. Because the point is that you might be sat there thinking, well, I don't supply Tesco's, therefore I'm okay. But it's sort of the hot potato problem in that the first big supplier who gets asked this is then going to turn around to their next supplier and go, we've been asked for these requirements. We've just started measuring our footprint and realised we need to understand what you're doing. And therefore, can you please tell us what you're doing? And then they move and then turn around to the next person. And it keeps on going to, even if you're 6, 7 steps removed from that supplier, you might then be a part of that chain. It's why it's called a supply chain, right? So don't think that just because you're not part of this directly, that you're not going to be impacted. If you are a business to business supplier, I'd be preparing yourself in the next few years that carbon footprint requirements, a carbon reduction plan requirements will be required.
Yeah, and I think there's obviously what we've spoken about so far is goods, the physical movement of goods and things that are manufactured. So we run a marketing agency, and we make a podcast for a very large corporate client. They're a massive listed company, and they have recently released their net zero ambitions, their net zero policy, and they are now starting to communicate with their supply chain that they require the supply chain to start preparing their own carbon reduction plan, because at some point in the future they're going to be requiring that. Now, we're an exceptionally small cog in an enormous machine when it comes to their supply chain, but it's interesting to see that their share price is going to start to be directly affected by their net zero policy and plan. Having that in place and how far they are through achieving that is going to start to affect their share price from next year. So I think, based on what effect that actually has on the share price, I think is going to directly influence how quickly they want that carbon data from their entire supply chain. Because, let's just take all of the stock market, so we're not talking about one specific stock here. If actually the market reacts in a way that says, well, actually the scoring of this business has gone down, and therefore they are perceived to be more risky and less investable, I think that's going to have a real knock-on effect across the whole market, because those big brands that make up big sections of the market are very quickly going to be like, we need to fix this, and we need to fix this very quickly. And they're going to turn around to their supply chain and start removing people from the supply chain that are adversely affecting their share price, or very quickly looking for alternative suppliers, where they're going to very quickly be like, oh, hang on, is there anybody else who can do this? Because this company aren't helping, they're making things worse. Is there anybody else that we can look to help supply that?
And I think that's the point, is you start becoming, are you working with them or against them? And if you don't have a carbon reduction plan, then they have no story to go off to see whether you're working with them or against them on decarbonisation. And I think there are some other impacts that we're starting to see from more ambitious corporates. And Microsoft, I think, is quite a good example of this. They do have quite detailed procurement policy documentation that is public. Does not sound the most exciting thing to go and read, but it is relatively straightforward. And they've got a section in there about what they're going to be doing with contracts that are coming up, which is basically putting in a carbon price or a carbon tax, where they will then be going, I mean, carbon tax is not the right word there, but if you've got 2 projects or proposals, one of which is 100 tons of emissions based on that company and, £10,000, or a company that is then 10 tons of emissions and £150, well, they're probably going to be pricing this project with a carbon price of several £100 or several $100 per ton, which will then suddenly make that higher carbon proposal more expensive than potentially the low carbon one, to take into impact the effects of working with these higher carbon companies. So therefore, I think there's a great opportunity to start leading that and being not only the most, even if you're a slightly more expensive offer, if you're a low carbon company, you might be rewarded for that within the pricing. So it's worth looking, if you are working with companies that tend to supply to large organizations, digging into this to understand actually what are their kind of levers, what are their pain points. It might be that because they're a large company, they're under quite a lot of legislative pressure here in a way that small businesses aren't, and therefore you can ease their pain by being a more ambitious, low carbon business and demonstrating your roadmap there. And I think that's where the commercial advantage is coming from, and that's where, to promote a little bit, where Small 99 comes in to help you craft that story and build those valid decarbonisation plans that are backed up by data and proven.
One of the things I was just thinking there is that some businesses we speak to about this think, well, actually, I don't deal with big clients. I'm not part of, a big supply chain. And I do wonder whether actually in the coming short term, whether actually the reason why you might not be part of a big supply chain is simply because you don't have that plan in place.
Yeah.
And actually, when people are looking for other businesses to partner with, to change supply, or to move where they're buying their things from, they're going out and looking on your website and thinking, well, does this company have a carbon reduction plan? No. Okay, then there's not even worth having the conversation with them. Let's just move on to find someone else who does. And obviously, that's just speculation, but I think that actually realistically it's time to start considering whether you might be losing out before you've even been invited into the conversation, simply because you're not talking about what you've done so far. And a lot of small businesses that I speak to have done an enormous amount already, percentage wise, compared to some of these big firms.
Yeah.
That you're already miles ahead, you're further down that road, and yes, you may have hit a roadblock and you may have been like, I'm stuck with this, I don't know what to do, but actually don't let that stop you telling the story of where you are, because compared to some of these big PLCs, you're miles ahead and are already leading the way.
And I think don't let, you'll have done more than you think already. And if you are blocked, that is a story in itself. If you are stuck and you can't do certain things, then tell people about that, because that adds to your story and adds to your credibility, which is really the word here, is how credible is your reduction plan. And being honest and transparent about those barriers is going to make your story a lot, stand up a lot easier to understand why you can't do things, or why you might not have done the obvious things like change energy supply or change your light bulbs. It might be you can't do that, and if that's the case, great, tell people. I think also just going back to that transparency piece around communicating your reduction plans is key. There is a technical document that typically is targeting tenders of £5 million or more, called PPN 0621, or the Public Procurement Notice 0621. This typically is for the construction sector or for large kind of government tenders like NHS, etc. However, we do start to see people wanting to align to this and documenting it against this as sort of the standard they're adopting. And I think it's really key to understand that. It's a very simple document. If you Google it, it'll come up and read the guidance. It's not too onerous. But one of the key requirements in there is that it is publicly available on your website from the homepage, which I think is quite an interesting requirement, in that if you do have this, you need to be able to find it really easily. And that might be in the footer of your homepage. It might be in just like a block at the bottom of the homepage, but making sure that it's easy to find and that your story is front and center so that anyone looking for these requirements can find it is part of the requirement of that tendering process. So, yeah, don't underestimate the power of that storytelling.
So I think we'll have to leave it there on this topic for this episode. There's lots more we can talk about in terms of supply chain, and I think we will be back in future episodes to explore how some different businesses that we're connected with have reached out to their supply chain, asked some questions, and had some really interesting and impactful results. So we'll be back with some more real world stories on that front soon. So until next time, do go and check out the Small 99 website for lots of different information all about what we've just spoken about, and also some practical advice on how you can get started with your carbon footprint using the carbon footprint measurement tool. And until next time, thank you very much for listening and watching, and we'll see you next time.
See you soon. Bye.
Bye.
Let's cut the bullshit.
Just drop the job.
Adm and Simon's bullshit bus stop.